the Counselor Gorith, a towering reptilian figure with scales that shimmered like molten gold under the chamber's artificial light. His voice, deep and resonant, cut through the din like a blade. The Krylos' dominion will not stop until they have consumed us all. We must act now, or we will be next. Ambassador Tom Noah, the lone human representative, leaned forward in his seat, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. His tailored suit, a stark contrast to the ornate robes and armor of the other delegates, marked him as an outsider. Yet his presence was undeniable, calm, calculated, and unyielding. Hiring the Krylos to protect us is like inviting a starved wolf into a sheepfold, Tom countered, his voice steady but edged with frustration. They'll turn on us the moment it suits them. Gorith's slit-pupiled eyes narrowed as he turned to face Tom. And what would you suggest, Ambassador? Your species has barely ventured beyond your own solar system. What could Earth possibly offer against the Krylos? Tom met Gorith's gaze without flinching. We may not have the largest fleet or the most advanced technology, but we have something far more valuable: ingenuity. And if you'd stop dismissing us for a moment, you might see that. Before Gorith could retort, the chamber's massive holographic display flickered to life, projecting a live feed from the outer rim. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly as the image of a Galactic Council outpost came into view, or what was left of it. The once proud station was now a smoldering wreck, its hull torn apart by Krylos warships. The merciless invaders moved with terrifying efficiency, their sleek, black vessels swarming like locusts. "This is what we face," Gorith said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "The Krylos are not just conquerors, they are exterminators. If we do not stop them, they will burn our worlds to ash." Tom clenched his fists under the table, his mind racing. He had known the Krylos were a threat, but seeing their destruction firsthand was another matter entirely. He couldn't let fear dictate the Council's decisions, though. "We can't fight monsters by becoming monsters ourselves," he said, rising to his feet. "There has to be another way." Gorith let out a derisive hiss. "Your idealism is admirable, Ambassador, but it will not save us. The Krylos respect only strength, and Earth has none to offer." Tom's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You're wrong, Counselor. Earth may not have the numbers or the firepower, but we have something the Krylos will never understand: resilience. And if you'll give us a chance, we can prove it." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Tom. Even Gorith seemed momentarily taken aback by the human's unwavering confidence. "And how exactly do you propose to do that?" the reptilian counselor asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Tom took a deep breath, knowing the next words out of his mouth would either cement his credibility or destroy it entirely. "We have a weapon," he said, his voice low but firm. "A single individual who has faced impossible odds and emerged victorious every time. His name is John Walker, the Baba Yaga." A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber, alien voices blending in a chorus of disbelief. "A single human?" Gorith sneered. "You expect us to believe that one man can do what entire armies cannot?" Tom didn't blink. "John Walker is not just a man. He's a force of nature. Give him the chance, and he'll show you exactly what Earth is capable of." The laughter died down as the delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Tom could see the doubt in their eyes, but he also saw something else, a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was enough. Gorith crossed his arms, his golden scales glinting in the light. "Very well, Ambassador. We will humor you for now. But if this John Walker fails, the blood of the galaxy will be on your hands." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "Understood. But if he succeeds, I expect the Galactic Council to finally recognize Earth as an equal." As the delegates began to disperse, Tom sank back into his seat, his mind racing. He had bought Earth a chance, but the real challenge was yet to come. Somewhere out there, John Walker was waiting, unaware of the role he was about to play in the fate of the galaxy. The chamber's lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. Tom stared at the holographic wreckage of the outpost, his resolve hardening. The Krylos had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity, and soon they would learn just how costly that mistake could be. For now, though, all he could do was wait, and hope that John Walker was as unstoppable as the legends claimed. The ramp descended, and John Walker stepped into the cold, sterile light of the bay. He was a man of unassuming presence at first glance, average height, lean build, and dressed in a tailored black suit that seemed to blend into the shadows. His face was calm, almost impassive, but his eyes, sharp and piercing, betrayed a quiet intensity. A small duffel bag hung loosely from his shoulder, its contents unknown but undoubtedly lethal. Behind him, the shuttle's engines hummed faintly before powering down. A group of alien delegates had gathered to witness his arrival, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Counselor Goreth stood at the forefront, his golden scales gleaming under the bay's harsh lights. His slit-pupiled eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the human. "This is your great weapon, Ambassador Noah," Goreth said, his voice dripping with disdain. "He looks more like a bureaucrat than a warrior." Tom Noah, standing a few paces away, ignored the jab. "Appearances can be deceiving, Counselor," he replied, his tone even. "John Walker is exactly what we need." Walker's gaze swept across the assembled aliens, lingering briefly on Goreth before settling on Tom. "Where's my dog?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, cutting through the tension like a knife. Tom blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Your dog?" "Yes," Walker said, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity. "I left him in the care of a friend. I need to know he's safe." Tom hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make sure he's taken care of. But right now we need to focus on the mission." Walker's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. He gave a slight nod, then turned his attention back to the aliens. "What's the job?" Goreth let out a derisive snort. "You expect us to believe one human can stop the Krylos? This is a waste of time." Walker's gaze locked onto the reptilian counselor, and for a moment, the air seemed to grow colder. "I don't care what you believe," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I'm here to do a job. Either get out of my way, or help me do it." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Tom stepped forward, breaking the standoff. "John, let's get you briefed. We don't have much time." Walker followed Tom out of the bay, leaving the alien delegates to murmur among themselves. As they walked through the station's labyrinthine corridors, Tom handed Walker a data pad. "The Krylos have a flagship, the Dreadclaw. It's the heart of their fleet, commanded by their warlord, Kraldar. If we can take it out, the rest of their forces will fall into disarray." Walker scanned the information, his expression unreadable. "What's the plan?" "You'll infiltrate the Dreadclaw, eliminate Kraldar, and disable their command systems. We've got a stealth ship that can get you close, but once you're on board, you'll be on your own." Walker nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "Who's flying the ship?" "Captain Elias Grant," Tom replied. "He's one of our best. You'll meet him in the hangar." The two men arrived at the station's training facility, a vast, high-tech arena designed for combat simulations. Walker set his duffel bag down and began to stretch, his movements fluid and precise. Tom watched as the human activated a holographic training program, selecting the highest difficulty setting. The simulation spawned a squad of Krylos soldiers, their hulking forms and glowing weapons a stark contrast to Walker's unassuming figure. The aliens in the observation gallery leaned forward, their skepticism giving way to curiosity. Walker moved like a shadow, his every action deliberate and efficient. He disarmed the first Krylos with a swift, calculated strike, then turned the soldier's own weapon against him. The next attacker fell to a precise shot from Walker's pistol, followed by a third who was incapacitated with a brutal knee strike. Within minutes, The simulation ended, the holographic enemies lying defeated at Walker's feet. The gallery erupted into murmurs of astonishment. Even Gorith looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. Tom allowed himself a small smile. "Still think he's a bureaucrat, counselor?" Gorith didn't respond, his gaze fixed on Walker as the human retrieved his duffel bag and exited the training arena. In the hangar, Captain Elias Grant was waiting beside a sleek, black stealth ship. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rugged face and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. His eyes lit up when he saw Walker approaching. "So, you're the legendary John Walker," he said, extending a hand. "Heard a lot about you." Walker shook the captain's hand, his grip firm but brief. "Let's get this done." Grant grinned. "Straight to the point." "I like that." He gestured to the ship. "She's called the Shadow Star. Fast, quiet, and packed with enough firepower to give the Krylos a bad day." "You ready?" Walker nodded, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Just get me close." As the two men boarded the ship, Tom watched from the hangar's observation deck. He felt a pang of unease, knowing the odds were stacked against them. But if anyone could pull this off, it was John Walker. The Shadow Star's engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off, gliding silently out of the hangar and into the void of space. Walker sat in the co-pilot seat, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Grant glanced at him, his tone more serious now. "You know this is a suicide mission, right? Even for you." Walker didn't look away from the viewport. "I've survived worse." Grant chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Yeah, I've heard the stories. Still, the Krylos aren't exactly pushovers." "Neither am I," Walker said, his voice calm but resolute. The ship's sensors pinged, indicating they were approaching the Krylos fleet's outer perimeter. Grant's hands moved deftly over the controls, activating the stealth systems. The Shadow Star vanished from sight, its engines humming softly as it slipped through the enemy's defenses. Walker stood, slinging his duffel bag over his shoulder. "Drop me at the closest entry point. I'll handle the rest." Grant nodded, his expression grim. "Good luck, Walker. You're gonna need it." As the ship descended toward the Dreadclaw, Walker's mind was already focused on the task ahead. He didn't care about the odds, the politics, or the galaxy's fate. He had a job to do, and nothing, not even an army of alien mercenaries, was going to stop him. The Shadow Star's hatch opened, and Walker stepped into the void, his figure silhouetted against the vast expanse of space. For a moment, he was weightless, suspended between life and death. Then his boots connected with the Dreadclaw's hull, and he began to move, silent and unstoppable, like a shadow in the night. The mission had begun. The Dreadclaw's hull was a labyrinth of jagged metal and pulsating energy conduits, its surface alive with the hum of alien technology. John Walker moved with practiced precision, his magnetic boots anchoring him to the ship as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The void of space stretched endlessly around him, a silent witness to his solitary mission. He reached an access hatch, his gloved hands working swiftly to bypass the security protocols. The hatch hissed open, and Walker slipped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. The interior of the Dreadclaw was a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of space. The corridors were dimly lit, the walls lined with glowing alien glyphs that pulsed rhythmically, like the heartbeat of some great beast. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Walker moved silently, his senses heightened, every nerve attuned to the slightest sound or movement. He didn't have to wait long. A patrol of Krylos soldiers rounded the corner, their hulking forms clad in black armor that seemed to absorb the light. Walker pressed himself against the wall, his breathing slow and controlled. The soldiers passed within inches of him, their glowing red visors scanning the corridor but failing to detect the shadow in their midst. As soon as they were out of sight, Walker continued his advance, his movements fluid and deliberate. The deeper he ventured into the ship, the more he realized the scale of the challenge ahead. The Dreadclaw was a fortress, its corridors teeming with soldiers, and its defenses nearly impenetrable. But Walker had faced impossible odds before, and he knew that the key to survival was not just strength, but adaptability. He reached a junction and paused, his sharp eyes scanning the area for any sign of surveillance. A faint whirring sound caught his attention, and he spotted a security drone hovering near the ceiling. Without hesitation, he drew a small throwing knife from his belt and hurled it with pinpoint accuracy. The drone sparked and fell silent, crashing to the floor with a dull thud. Walker retrieved the knife and pressed on, his mind focused on the task at hand. He needed to reach the bridge, where Kraldar would be orchestrating the Krylos campaign of destruction. But getting there would require more than just stealth. It would require chaos. He found a control panel embedded in the wall and quickly accessed it, his fingers flying over the alien interface. The glyphs were unfamiliar, but their logic was universal. Within moments, he had triggered a series of alarms, their shrill wails echoing through the corridors. The ship's lighting shifted to a deep red, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Walker slipped into a nearby maintenance shaft just as a squad of Krylos soldiers rushed past, their weapons drawn and their voices raised in confusion. The distraction had bought him time, but it also meant the ship was on high alert. Walker moved through the maintenance shafts with practiced ease, his mind racing as he formulated his next move. He emerged in a storage bay filled with crates of alien weaponry and supplies. The bay was deserted, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. He quickly armed himself, selecting a compact energy rifle and a handful of grenades. The weapons felt foreign in his hands, but he adapted quickly, his instincts honed by years of experience. As he prepared to leave the bay, the doors slid open, revealing a Krylos commander flanked by a dozen soldiers. The commander's armor was more ornate than the others, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. He stepped forward, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "You're a long way from home, human. What do you hope to accomplish here?" Walker didn't respond. He simply raised the energy rifle and fired, the shot striking the commander's chest and sending him staggering back. The soldiers opened fire, their weapons filling the air with searing bolts of energy. Walker dove behind a stack of crates, his mind calculating the angles and trajectories of the incoming fire. He returned fire with precision, each shot finding its mark and thinning the ranks of his enemies. The commander recovered quickly, his armor absorbing the brunt of the attack. He charged at Walker, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. Walker met him head-on, sidestepping a powerful swing and delivering a series of rapid strikes to the commander's vulnerable joints. The alien roared in pain and frustration, his attacks growing more erratic. Walker seized the opportunity, driving a knife into the gap between the commander's helmet and chest plate. The alien collapsed, his body twitching as the life drained from him. The remaining soldiers hesitated, their confidence shaken by the loss of their leader. Walker didn't give them a chance to regroup. He activated one of the grenades and tossed it into their midst, the explosion sending shrapnel and debris flying in all directions. When the dust settled, the bay was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the ship's systems. Walker took a moment to catch his breath, his body aching from the exertion. He knew he couldn't afford to rest, not yet. The bridge was still a long way off, and the Krylos would be regrouping. He pressed on, his resolve unshaken. As he neared the bridge, the corridors became more heavily guarded, the soldiers more alert. Walker used every trick in his arsenal, from misdirection to brute force, to carve a path through the enemy. He left a trail of destruction in his wake, the ship's systems sparking and failing as he sabotaged them along the way. The Dreadclaw was beginning to feel the strain, its once imposing presence now faltering under the weight of Walker's relentless assault. Finally, he reached the bridge. The doors were heavily fortified, but Walker had anticipated this. He placed a series of explosive charges around the frame and stepped back, shielding his eyes as the charges detonated. The doors blew inward, and Walker stormed through, his weapons at the ready. The bridge was a sprawling chamber filled with alien consoles and holographic displays. At its center stood Kraldar, the Krylos warlord. He was a towering figure, his armor adorned with trophies from countless battles. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light as he turned to face Walker. "You've come far, human," he said, his voice a deep, resonant growl. "But this is where your journey ends." Walker didn't waste time with words. He raised his weapon and fired, but Kraldar moved with surprising speed, deflecting the shot with a flick of his wrist. The warlord charged, his massive form closing the distance in an instant. Walker barely had time to dodge the first strike, the force of it shaking the floor beneath him. The two combatants clashed in a brutal exchange of blows, each one testing the limits of their strength and skill. Walker's movements were precise and calculated, his strikes aimed at the weak points in Kraldar's armor. The warlord, however, was a formidable opponent, his raw power and endurance pushing Walker to his limits. As the battle raged on, the Dreadclaw began to shudder, its systems failing under the strain of Walker's sabotage. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered, casting the bridge in a chaotic strobe of red and white. Walker knew he was running out of time. He needed to end this, now. With a final, desperate effort, he disarmed Kraldar and drove a knife into the warlord's side, the blade piercing the armor and finding its mark. Kraldar roared in pain, his massive form collapsing to the ground. Walker stood over him, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The warlord's glowing eyes dimmed, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You cannot stop us. The Krylos will rise again." Walker didn't respond. He simply turned and activated the ship's self-destruct sequence, the countdown beginning with a series of ominous beeps. He had done what he came to do. Now it was time to leave. As he made his way back to the Shadow Star, the Dreadclaw began to break apart around him, its once mighty form consumed by fire and chaos. Walker didn't look back. He had a job to do, and nothing, not even an army of alien mercenaries, was going to stop him. The Dreadclaw was dying. Its once imposing corridors were now a maze of fire and debris, the ship's systems failing in a cascade of sparks and smoke. John Walker moved through the chaos with single-minded determination, his body aching from the relentless battles he had fought. The self-destruct sequence he had activated was counting down, its ominous beeps echoing through the crumbling vessel. He had to reach the Shadow Star before the ship tore itself apart. As he neared the hangar, a sudden tremor rocked the Dreadclaw, sending him stumbling into a wall. The impact jarred his injured ribs, and he gritted his teeth against the pain. He pushed forward, his movements slower now, but no less deliberate. The hangar doors came into view, their reinforced frames warped and sparking from the damage. Walker's heart sank as he realized they were sealed shut, the mechanisms jammed by the ship's failing systems. He activated his comlink, his voice calm despite the urgency. "Grant, I'm at the hangar. Doors are sealed. Can you override them from your end?" There was a pause. Then Captain Elias Grant's voice crackled through the static. "Working on it, Walker. Hold tight." Walker didn't have time to hold tight. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind him, and he turned to see a squad of Krylos soldiers charging down the corridor, their weapons raised. They had been waiting for him, their orders clear: stop the human at all costs. Walker raised his energy rifle and fired, the shots cutting through the lead soldiers with brutal efficiency. But there were too many of them, and his ammunition was running low. He dropped the rifle and drew a pair of pistols, their grips familiar and reassuring in his hands. He moved with lethal precision, each shot finding its mark as he backed toward the hangar doors. The soldiers fell one by one, but more kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Walker's body screamed for rest, but he pushed the fatigue aside, his focus narrowing to the immediate threat. He was a machine, every movement calculated, every breath measured. But even machines had their limits. As the last of the soldiers fell, Walker slumped against the wall, his chest heaving. He was running out of time. The ship's tremors were growing more violent, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. He activated his comm link again. "Grant status." "Almost there," Grant replied, his voice tense. Just a few more seconds. The hangar doors shuddered, then began to grind open, the mechanisms straining against the damage. Walker didn't wait for them to fully open. He slipped through the gap, his eyes scanning the hangar for the Shadow Star. The sleek black ship was still there, its engines humming softly as Grant prepared for a quick escape. Walker sprinted toward the ship, his legs burning with the effort. He was almost there when a deafening roar filled the hangar, freezing him in his tracks. He turned to see Kraldar, the Krylos warlord, emerging from the smoke. The warlord's armor was battered and scorched, but he was still standing, his glowing eyes locked on Walker with a mixture of rage and admiration. "You are relentless," Kraldar growled, his voice a deep, guttural rumble. "But you will not leave this ship alive." Walker didn't respond. He simply raised his pistols and fired, the shots ricocheting off the warlord's armor. Kraldar charged, his massive form moving with terrifying speed. Walker dodged the first strike, but the second caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling across the hangar floor. Pain exploded through his body, but Walker forced himself to his feet, his movements slower now, but no less determined. He knew he couldn't outmatch Kraldar in strength, but he didn't need to. He just needed to outthink him. The warlord lunged again, his massive fists slamming into the ground where Walker had been standing moments before. Walker rolled to the side, his mind racing as he searched for an advantage. He spotted a fallen Krylos soldier's weapon nearby and dove for it, his fingers closing around the hilt of a plasma blade. The weapon hummed to life, its glowing edge casting an eerie light across the hangar. Kraldar laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think that toy can stop me?" Walker didn't answer. He simply charged, the blade flashing as he aimed for the weak points in the warlord's armor. Kraldar blocked the first strike, but Walker was relentless, his movements a blur of precision and speed. He feinted left, then struck right, the blade slicing through the armor and drawing a roar of pain from the warlord. Kraldar retaliated with a powerful backhand, the force of the blow sending Walker skidding across the floor. He tasted blood in his mouth, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest, and charged again. The two combatants clashed in a brutal exchange of blows, each one testing the limits of their strength and endurance. Walker's strikes were precise and calculated, his every movement aimed at exploiting the warlord's weaknesses. Kraldar, however, was a force of nature, his raw power and resilience pushing Walker to his absolute limit. As the battle raged on, the Dreadclaw began to break apart around them, the ship's structural integrity failing under the strain of the self-destruct sequence. The hangar's ceiling cracked, chunks of metal and debris raining down as the ship groaned in its death throes. Walker knew he was running out of time. With a final, desperate effort, he disarmed Kraldar and drove the plasma blade into the warlord's side, the weapon piercing the armor and finding its mark. Kraldar roared in pain, his massive form collapsing to the ground. Walker stood over him, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The warlord's glowing eyes dimmed, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You cannot stop us. The Krylos will rise again." Walker didn't respond. He simply turned and sprinted toward the Shadow Star, the ship's engines roaring to life as Grant prepared for takeoff. He leapt onto the ramp just as the hangar's ceiling gave way, the ship lifting off moments before the Dreadclaw was consumed by a massive explosion. Inside the Shadow Star, Walker collapsed into a seat, his body battered and broken but alive. Grant glanced at him, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "You did it, Walker. You actually did it." Walker didn't respond. He simply closed his eyes, his mind already drifting to the one thing that mattered most, his dog. Back at the Galactic Council space station, the delegates watched in stunned silence as the Dreadclaw's destruction played out on the holographic display. Tom Noah stood at the center of the chamber, his expression a mixture of pride and relief. "Earth may not have the largest fleet or the most advanced technology," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "But we have something far more valuable, the will to fight no matter the odds." Counselor Gorath, for once, had no sarcastic retort. He simply nodded, his golden scales glinting in the light. "Perhaps we have underestimated your species, Ambassador Noah." Tom allowed himself a small smile. "Perhaps you have." As the delegates began to disperse, Tom turned his gaze to the stars, his mind already racing with the possibilities. Earth had proven itself on the galactic stage, and John Walker had proven that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire capable of consuming the darkness. For now, though, all that mattered was that the galaxy was safe, and that John Walker could finally go home to his dog.